All right, so for my capstone project, I researched marriage and women roles in Mesopotamia, and current Mesopotamia isn't called Mesopotamia anymore. It is called like current day Iraq and those Middle Eastern countries. So, um, the marriage roles, like everybody knows what marriage is, it just binds two people together. And it was first recorded in 2350 BC. Here's a picture of a wedding in Iraq. Um, in the Epic of Gilgamesh and in the Courtship of Inanna and Dumuzi, both of these show like different marriage roles and expectations. And they also show like the roles of prostitution, which have really changed from back then to today. So we're going to compare like modern day traditions compared to like back then traditions, which were shown through the myths. And so we're going to just go ahead and jump into that. So marriage in the Epic of Gilgamesh, we just read that not too long ago. And what we did learn was that Gilgamesh slept with virgin brides on their wedding night before their groom could. And this doesn't really show that, like, I mean, yeah, he wasn't a very good person, but it does show that he had power over those men and women because keeping virginity and the man being able to like take it was a sign of power. So that virginity expectation is held in this myth, and so obviously it was held back in those ancient times as well. Another thing that is shown that Ishtar has a desire for Gilgamesh after she sees him, so that like shows that physical attraction was still a thing. And also Ishtar is the one that asks and like wants Gilgamesh to marry her, and normally the man is the one that proposes, which was kind of interesting because in ancient Iraq and even in modern day Iraq, marriage was usually a contract between the groom and the bride's father, and so the woman doesn't really get to choose. But Ishtar also isn't a virgin, so that was interesting too. I think goddesses don't really have that expectation. So, virginity expectations. The main root for virginity is that the husband wants to make sure that the heirs that she has, the children that she has, are actually theirs. And they also want like new women and not used women. So apparently, sex before marriage makes you a used woman. So that's what like their kind of like background is for it. And it's mostly for patriarchal power because they want to make sure the kid's theirs so that way the inheritance and all that kind of stuff works out. Goddesses aren't really held to this expectation, but also goddesses can control if they conceive a child. Mortal women really can't. Well, they can now, but they couldn't back then because birth control didn't really exist. So also goddesses are usually considered virgins unless they like have a child, which I thought was very interesting to me because that is not the case for women, like mortal women. They're considered not virgins if their hymen is not intact. So um, basically, their hymens need to be intact, and that's how they kind of like check if they're virgins or not for marriage. Fertility expectations. So, one of the purposes of marriage is to have children, and so if a woman's not able to conceive, the husband can actually marry another woman. And this isn't so much true now. I mean, it occasionally can happen, but back then it was very prominent. And so this kind of like shows that women who are infertile or even maybe like don't even like want to have a kid, it shows that like they're less like thought of as less of, and that men can just be disloyal to them if they don't give them what they want, which isn't right because I think both should have that, you know, choice. So, men don't have the requirement to be a virgin in marriage, but also there's not really any way to check that. So, I guess that's probably a reason why. But another reason is that they don't have that expectation to care for their child as the woman does. So, another reason that marriage exists is through financial aid. A lot of parents will marry off their daughters in order for themselves to have financial security. There's a lot of financial problems, especially after the wars and everything that has been happening in Iraq. A lot of child marriages are happening. So parents will actually marry off their daughters at very young ages, which this is shown in this picture. They're like super young little girls, but it's occurred in ancient Mesopotamia and it's still occurring. And it kind of like portrays that money is of higher importance than their daughter's safety and well being. Men aren't usually married off as children, but women are. And so it kind of just means that like we're thought it was less than. Again, it kind of puts that emphasis on that. Child marriage. So virginity is supposed to be upheld until marriage, like we talked about previously. Parents will marry young girls in order to prevent them from engaging in premarital sexual activities. So, if you are engaging in premarital activities, it really brings a lot of shame towards you and that family. And that can be really bad sometimes. They even will behead that woman and make the family put it on like a stick and put it in their yard for everybody to see for like a week. So it's very shameful. And so that kind of assumes that girls are going to behave immorally. And so they kind of want to prevent bringing that shame, which is selfish, to their own family. And honestly, though, they might be protecting their daughter too. So that's why they also marry them off at a young age or like right when puberty's starting or right after it. So in the courtship of Inanna and Dumuzi, Inanna's brother picked out Dumuzi for her, and it kind of like shows that men are the head of the household. So Dumuzi like wants her to marry, or her brother wants her to marry Dumuzi, and he said that Dumuzi was born from a wed woman out of a fertile womb, and that kind of also portrays that people born from unwed mothers are less worthy and aren't, fit to be married. They also like uh, choose for them. So Inanna wanted to marry the farmer, but she told her brother this, but he insisted that she marry Dumuzi. And so the only women that were really exempt from these rules of being chose like who they can marry and who they can't was like prostitutions or prostitutes. My bad. So let me go back. Okay. Prostitution back in ancient Mesopotamia was thought of as a job and not very immoral. So prostitutes had more freedom than other women did. They could like control their own financial needs and their own money. But modern day ones are really frowned upon in Iraq. It's illegal. A lot of them are sex trafficked and murdered, and it's thought of as immoral because of religious beliefs. As a Islam religion and the Quran prohibit prostitution. So the roots of prostitution actually start from religion, and a lot of people don't think about that. But it's said to start in the temples of the fertility goddesses, such as Inanna, and it's supposed to like honor the goddess and bless the temple. And commercial prostitution actually stems from temple prostitution. So prostitution is important in Epic of Gilgamesh to civilize man, and it's not immoral. It's not thought of as immoral. Like the lady was actually encouraged to go and do it. So Islamic religion emerged in the 7th century, and then prostitution became immoral and illegal after the book of Quran forbids it, whatever. Okay. So marriage customs and rules come from different ancient Mesopotamian mythology. Some customs have changed due to religion, some of them have remained the same. Ancient Mesopotamian mythology helps researchers to understand the roots and purposes from an indirect viewpoint. The roots of marriage are financial stability, or if they don't want their daughter engaging in premarital sexual activities, and the purpose of binding two together to form heirs. And then the virginity expectation is also held because they want new women, not used, and they want to be able to be sure that the children are biologically their own. And let me go back. We can really talk about prostitution in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So prostitution is very widely and a very important part of the Epic of Gilgamesh. It civilizes Enkidu and is the reason that Gilgamesh and Enkidu really meet. The prostitute actually kind of cares for him and does all of that. But now in Iraq, prostitution is so immoral that people they will actually just murder them and sex traffic them. They actually are said to live in certain houses, like this a bunch of prostitutes live in like this one house or this one apartment complex. And oftentimes murders will happen. It's on the news a lot. And the people that like live around the apartments say that they make these murders illegal and like they'll talk about them, but nobody actually does anything about it. And the Islam religion is very strict about how they like the expectations that they hold their women to. And so really everybody kind of thinks that these murders are okay. Well, not everybody, but a lot of the people think that it's what they deserve since they are not honoring their own religion. Marriage expectations are still somewhat like different than what they were back then. They still have some of the same traditions as like Mesopotamia and modern day Iraq. Obviously, weddings in other places are a lot different. Like weddings in the United States are a lot different than what they would be in Iraq. Child marriage really isn't a huge issue over here. But also, like some of these things really stem from wanting to bind families together for financial security. And so it really shows how women are thought of as being less important than money. And also, men are always the top of the household, they make all the decisions. And the only way that women can like escape this is through prostitution. Back then, it was okay, and like those were the women that didn't really have families and they were just kind of independent. But today, those women are very much frowned upon. So it kind of, which is kind of interesting because prostitution stem like from gods and goddesses and like helping to worship them, which is like a form of religion. It's not like exact religion, but it's a way of worship. And it's interesting that it kind of like stemmed from those beliefs. And then now it's thought of as being this awful thing because of the Quran, like saying that it is. In other religions, it's bad, or it's portrayed as being bad and everything too. By no means am I saying that you should go out and be a prostitute. Probably not a good idea. But I'm just like comparing the where prostitution came from and like where it's at now and just like the reasons for it. So religion basically is the number one thing that changed all these expectations and customs and all of those kinds of things. The original like meanings for them were different than what they are now because of the Islam religion and the other religions that can be manifesting in that area. So that was my capstone project. If you have any questions, just let me know. I kind of felt like I wasn't able to research it as much, but that's pretty much everything. And I kind of found the roots of where marriage and virginity expectations came from. So that was very